Okay, so today we are going to continue with our exploration of embryology using the video link that is in the chat. Beautiful, thank you. And the reason I do this is because, in my experience, having an understanding of our anatomy, having understanding of development, having an understanding of embryology, having an understanding of even a very basic understanding of these forces that have been innate, in essence, within us since we were created as a fertilized embryo. When you are in states of meditation, or when you do feel as if maybe there is an activation of a Kundalini energy, you may actually have the physical sensation of some of these movements that actually occurred in the embryo. Because when you look at, for instance, anything develop, even a plant, if you were to take it and like take a video and watch, let's say, a plant develop, that there's a certain patterning that occurs. Whether that patterning is a seedling that's coming out of the dirt going towards the sun and then expanding and then shooting up another little leaflet and that growing up and expanding. There's certain energetic patterns that are reproducible, and it just kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so these are energetic patterns that are present in us. They're still present in us. And when we activate any type of energy, we might have a sense of that. And if we have an understanding, this is sort of where we're bringing a bit of sort of like higher intellect consciousness into it. As we are sensing something, the more obviously we practice meditation and the more we practice our resource and the more we practice titration, the more we're going to be okay with any movement that occurs. That's sort of a given. The more that you can be present with anything that's occurring, the more as you notice a certain energy that is starting to unfold or open or awaken, you'll be more okay with being with it, as opposed to either closing down, becoming fearful, becoming super ecstatic that there is actually no control whatsoever. And then it's almost like an electrical bolt that comes through that has no containment. And so we want to learn how to contain it, but also expand it. Sort of this polarity of being with the moment as well as being timeless, being totally embodied as well as being completely in a state of undifferentiated consciousness, for instance. And so in my experience, the more that we can sort of ask, oh, what is this? Can I be with this? And then almost maybe inquire into what it might be. And it could be like a little checklist maybe that you sort of go down, right? Could this be an embryologic formation or an embryologic energy? Could this be prior to fertilization? Could this be in the DNA? And we'll go over kind of DNA stuff. Is this in the fluids? Is this in the bone? Is this in the muscle? Is this in the visceral tissues? Is it in the myofascial tissue? Whatever it might be. And so the more we've had experience with various senses that occur from each one of those body parts, the more as we're almost kind of like going down a check. Sometimes it just kind of comes to us. But sometimes we might actually be going down a checklist, especially as we're doing this initially. We go down a checklist, we go, this kind of feels maybe like it's in the fascial plane, some energy, feels like an electrical current that's moving in the fascia. Oh. And then you inquire about that. So it's not like oh, that's it. It's sort of like, oh, could that be it? And you see you're sort of asking, you're sort of talking to yourself, sort of talking to the body, almost like you're talking to the energy that's moving, having a relationship with it. Right? And it will respond. I guarantee you, it will respond. You'll get a response. You get a, some sort of yes, no, maybe so kind of. And in your mind's eye, as you become more familiar with the territory of the physical body, with the territory of the embryo, with the territory of your embryologic formation, and the expansion that occurs in the embryo, for instance, and the fluids that are present in the embryo, the more in your mind's eye, as the energy is actually flowing, you can actually help guide it. It's almost as if the energy and you become one, and you're just sort of moving with it. It's not like you're controlling it, and it's not controlling you. It's like a dance, right? When you're totally in flow with your partner, let's say, when you're totally in sync, if you ever watch sort of birds moving in the air in flow, right? There's no one that's leading. It's sort of they're all, and that's sort of how it is. And so this is sort of, it's sort of like, oh, could this be an embryologic energy? And you'll get a response and you go, oh, wow, I remember seeing that. And then you're in your mind's eye, you're almost like replaying that, and it's actually going through, the energy is actually going through as you're feeling it embodied in real time right now, let's say. You're actually visualizing it and helping guide it. And let's say there was a moment where that energy got stuck or got a bit stagnant or something like that. We're reawakening. It's reawakening in real time. And so what better time than right now to help it flow, right? And so as you're sort of visualizing, but yet also being totally open to the moment and the unfoldment of what's occurring, as you're visualizing, maybe you are bringing in images of embryo or anatomy and seeing like, oh, is this where it's going? Almost like you are giving it a roadmap through your own consciousness of where the energy can go, how it can be manifested, how it can be released, how it can be expressed, whatever that might be. Okay. Even just being able to, when you're in a state of meditation and, for instance, noticing a bit of constriction in a body part, even being able to go into that constriction with your mind's eye and asking, is this the skin? Is this the layer just beneath the skin? Is this the subcutaneous tissue? Is it the muscle? Is it the nerves that are just under the skin? Is it the blood vessels? Is it the bone? If you do that, with enough practice, you'll recognize that there is a response even by that inquiry. Okay. So you feel a little constriction, visualize it as you are coming from your resource. As you are noticing, can you go to that restriction? Are you titrating with that restriction? Is it a good time to go to that restriction? Because we don't know what it is, right? We're going to inquire about it. Can you go from, where are you coming from when you go to that restriction? You're coming from your resource. How? Well, you're paying attention to your resource and you're gently shifting your awareness towards the constriction. You're seeing, how much can I hold? How much can I bring in the present moment? What does it feel like? Where is it located to? Et cetera, et cetera. Right? So do you see how this goes all the way back to session 1, 2, 3, 4? And that's really important that you sort of have that down, because anything then that arises in terms of anything that, any energy that starts to move, that starts to awaken, you can be with it, have a resource for it so that it doesn't explode, but it also can move. You can say, oh, wow. It's a totally dynamic, totally balanced, totally regulated process that's actually occurring in relationship.
By the end of the second week of development, the bilaminar embryonic disc, consisting of the hypoblast and epiblast, has formed.
All right, day 14. 14 days after fertilization. All right, 14 days after fertilization. This is us. This is what becomes the human being that is born. That's it. Two layers of cells, one on top of another, with a connecting stalk here that's going to be this connecting stalk, right? If you touch your umbilicus right now, that is the scar from that connecting stalk. All right. So there it is. There it is. You touch your umbilicus, and what are you connecting into? Whoa, you're connecting into day 14, right? And this is where in that you can ask yourself, well, who am I? Who am I, right? Where did I come from? Who was I prior to this? And this is a really good inquiry. I would highly recommend that, right? So you touch your umbilicus, that's the scar from this connecting stalk here, connecting you in to your mother's womb. However old you are, plus 9 months, essentially, right? Because we don't take that into account. So you're really 9 months older than you really think you are. And this is day 14, so it's 8.5 months plus, however old you are.
Throughout the third week of development, this bilaminar disc differentiates to establish 3 primary germ layers in a process known as gastrulation. Around 15 days after fertilization, a thickened structure.
15 days after fertilization, right? You go from a 2, like think of like a 2-layered cake, right? Chocolate and vanilla. And through the process of this gastrulation, you become a 3-layered cake: chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. Okay. It also forms this midline streak. This is very important. Very important. Because when you ask yourself, where is my midline? That's a really good question to ask yourself. Where is your midline? As you connect to your midline, let's say you use your midline right now, Okay. Your midline might be an imagination of you're splitting the right and left side of your body and you have a sort of center. You might imagine your midline being your spinal cord. You might imagine your midline at your heart. You might imagine your midline at your third ventricle or the middle of your brain or your third eye. You might imagine your midline as chakras that are going down your body, wherever you imagine your midline. Okay. Anatomically, in terms of how we visualize things with our eyes, this is the first midline. This is the first midline, right? Which is actually, when we look at it, actually goes all the way back to our vertebra, our spine. Okay. So this is sort of the initiation of the development of the midline. It's the first midline that we can see. And so when you connect to your midline, energetically, if you're connecting to your midline, you may actually also be connecting to your midline at day 15 of your development. Because this is the first physiologic midline that we can see. Now, molecularly, that gets into a whole nother sort of cup of tea, because molecularly, the midline underneath is already starting to set itself up based on how the fluids are moving, based on how electrical currents are moving. Okay.
Structure forms along the midline in the epiblast near the caudal end of the bilaminar embryonic disc. This is called the primitive streak.
So the primitive streak. So just kind of put that in the back of your head, okay?
At this stage, the formation of the primitive streak defines the major body axes of the embryo, including the cranial end towards the head and caudal ends towards the tail, as well as the...
So they just took it and spun it, right? So at first it was where you're seeing sort of the head on the left and our butt on the right, or what they call the tail, and then they spun it.
The left and right sides of the embryo.
So the left and right side of the embryo, because the way that we are going to develop is, imagine our head facing into the screen, facing down. Okay, can you imagine that? Can you imagine sort of sticking your head into this cavity as if you're laying down like this, like you're laying down with your face facing down towards the yellow cells? All right? That's why the left is on that side and the right is on that side. Okay?
The cranial end of the embryonic disc, the primitive streak expands to create a primitive node, which contains a circular depression.
So the area where our head is going to develop expands. Why do you think it's going to expand? Because it's got to make the brain. Right? The brain is, and believe it or not, the heart. The heart is right underneath, right sort of in front of the brain, and as our heart develops, it drops down into the cavity. And our head, you know how we say bow? Our head, as we're born, our head is sort of bowing down to our hearts. Our brain is bowing down to our hearts.
Known as a primitive pit. This depression continues along the midline of the epiblast towards the caudal end of the streak, forming a primitive groove. Once formed, cells of the epiblast migrate inwards towards the streak, detach from the epiblast, and slip beneath it into the interior of the embryo. This process is known as invagination. The first cells to invaginate through the primitive groove invade the hypoblast and displace its cells. The hypoblast cells are eventually completely replaced by a new proximal cell layer, which is referred to as the definitive endoderm. By day 16, the majority of the hypoblast has been replaced. The remaining cells of the epiblast are now referred to as the ectoderm and forms the most exterior distal layer. Some of the invaginated epiblast cells remain in the space between the ectoderm and newly formed definitive endoderm. These cells form a germ layer known as the mesoderm. Once the formation of the definitive endoderm and mesoderm are complete, epiblast cells no longer migrate towards the primitive streak. Throughout gastrulation, the ectoderm continues to form from the cranial to the caudal end of the embryo, establishing three distinct primary germ layers throughout the whole embryonic disc. The gastrulation process is finally complete.
So, in meditation, you may actually feel this movement of the cells as they drop down and move towards the head. Drop down and move towards the head. It's almost like it's a flow of energy that's coming from the midline. Oops. That's coming from the midline, and that's actually going up towards the head and the heart. Okay?
The first event of neurulation is the formation of a thickened area of cells, called the neural plate. The neural plate forms at the cranial end of the embryo and grows in a cranial to caudal direction. The cranial or head end of the neural plate indicates the region of the future brain, and the narrower caudal or tail end represents the future region of the spinal cord. By the end of the...
So remember, 3 layers. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
third week of development, the lateral edges of the neural plate become elevated and move together to form the neural folds.
So again, this is as if our head is facing into the screen. We're facing down and our head is sort of in the screen. Left is on the left, right is on the right. So imagine you're laying down and all of a sudden, right, you are this 3-layered cake, and all of a sudden one of the layers starts to invaginate, it goes down, right? It actually literally goes down like that. Watch.
The resulting space created by the folding of the neural plate is called the neural groove. The neural folds fuse together, and the neural plate transforms into the neural tube, the precursor to the central nervous system. Fusion of the neural tube usually begins in the middle of the embryo, extending in both cranial and caudal direction.
So this is towards the head, this is towards the tail.
During the closure of the neural tube, cells on the crest of the neural folds detach, forming a new cell population called the neural crest. These cells contribute to the formation of the peripheral nervous system. Once the neural tube has completely fused, the process of neurulation is complete. During the 4th week of development,
So this is the amniotic space here where there's fluid. This is also fluid in here, known as the yolk sac. This is actually the developing heart right here. So the developing brain, which is going to occur right here. You can see how close in relationship the heart and the brain are in development as well.
a period of rapid growth, the embryo begins to change shape from a flat trilaminar disc into a cylinder, a process known as embryonic folding.
So, so you are a flat 3-layered. That's all that means. Trilaminar. 3-layered disc. So, go back and visit that flat 3-layered disc.
Embryonic folding occurs in two planes, the horizontal plane and the median plane, and is the result of differing rates of growth of the embryonic structures. Folding of the embryo in the horizontal plane results in the development of two lateral body folds. Folding in the median plane results in the development of the cranial and caudal folds. Folding in both of these planes takes place simultaneously, resulting in the rapid development of the embryo. The cylinder consists of 3 layers derived from the trilaminar embryonic disc. These are the endoderm, the innermost layer, the ectoderm, the outermost layer, and the mesoderm, located in between. The endoderm of the trilaminar disc is mainly responsible for the formation of the gastrointestinal tract. As embryonic folding continues, the endoderm moves towards the midline and fuses, incorporating the dorsal part of the yolk sac to create the primitive gut tube. The primitive gut tube differentiates into 3 main parts: the foregut, midgut, and hindgut. The foregut can be seen at the cranial or head end of the embryo. It is temporarily closed by the oropharyngeal membrane, which at the end of the 4th week of development ruptures to form the mouth. The midgut lies between the fore and hindgut and remains connected to the yolk sac until the 5th week of development. As embryonic folding continues, the connection to the yolk sac narrows into a stalk known as the vitellin duct. The hindgut lies at the caudal or tail end of the embryo. It is temporarily closed by the cloacal membrane, which during the 7th week of development ruptures to form the urogenital and anal openings. As a result of embryonic folding, the major body plan is established, and the 3 germ layers continue to differentiate, giving rise to their own specific tissues and organ systems. Consists of 3 layers derived
Okay, so did you
from
see the cells here of the heart, and the cells here that are going to become the brain are the cells of the heart as they go through the movement?
Disc.
These start to expand
the endoderm, the innermost layer,
and drop
the
in
ectoderm,
and
the
drop
outermost
down
layer,
into this
and
area.
the mesoderm, located in between. The endoderm of the trilaminar disc is mainly responsible for the formation of the
As they go in,
narrows into a stalk
that's then
known
becomes
as
the heart.
vitellin duct. The
Okay.
hindgut. As a result of embryonic folding, the
Okay, so you can see how at any point, you heard their embryonic folding. So there's this expansion, right? There's this expansion of cells towards the head because the brain needs to form. There's an elongation of the body plan, right? There's an elongation, but then there's also an expansion of the cells. So you have this vertical plane and you have this horizontal plane that's occurring, right? And here we are. So we're expanding in one way. We're expanding in this way. This is creating the right and left plane, essentially. This is creating the cranial caudal plane, right? And just imagine, right, that those same forces are within us today. That those same forces of expansion of the horizontal plane and the vertical plane of this connection, where do they meet? energetically now today, right? There's a meeting of them. Imagine as you are an embryo going from this bilaminar shape to a trilaminar shape, from a trilaminar shape, 3 layers, right? Now you start folding in and coming up and fusing and expanding in all directions, and simply allowing the process of creation to unfold just as it is supposed to go, without any conscious input, without any thoughts, without any emotion. It's just, what is it? It's the perfect unfolding of the moment of all these energies that are working together to create the human body. And the reason I find this, well, there's many reasons I find this so fascinating. We essentially can go back to any point that we want. Number one, we can also go back prior. Where was this energy prior to the egg? Prior to the egg being fertilized? The egg, let me see if I can get this straight. I'm going to use you. Do you have a daughter, Linda, or just two sons? You have a daughter?
Yes, just
Okay.
2 boys.
2 boys. Okay. So I have a daughter. The eggs for my wife had a daughter when when our daughter was in my wife's womb. My daughter already had the eggs in her ovary for my wife's grandchildren. Okay, so as my daughter's developing and creating the ovaries, those ovaries are making cells which are the eggs that could one day become our grandchildren. And my wife is holding our daughter in her womb. Okay. So now you go back to not only your mother, but then also your grandmother physically. Not, I'm not talking about energetically or DNA, or we haven't even gotten to that point. I'm talking physically. Okay, so at any point, for me, it helps to have these images so that as I sense these energies, for instance, and they form, it's sort of like, this is the energy of creation. This is the energy of manifestation. This is energetic movement. And since we are in these physical bodies, we're going to have these energies. We're going to be able to feel these energies moving. Okay. This to me is sort of, it's sort of like when we get out of the way, allow that energy of creation to take hold. When you start looking at embryology is sort of like, to me, in all forms of embryology, even from a seed to a plant to a flower to a fruit, it doesn't matter. There's divine intelligence that is informing this process. There's divine intelligence that is informing our everyday movements. Now we get involved because we think that we're so smart, and we, get all complicated with our thoughts and things like that. And oftentimes we're not in relationship with it. There's a blockage that's occurring. And that blockage usually is felt in, signs of, let's say, discomfort, distress, whatever it might be. Um, so that is like in 18 minutes, that's probably one of the best sort of summaries of embryologic development that I could that I could find in terms of really clearly, looking at it. Um, we're gonna look at it a little bit more in detail from a fluid perspective in terms of looking at energy being able to be transferred, how energy can be transferred, and looking at this is a theory and full on hypothesis of energy transferring uh, from less differentiated to more differentiated structures through the most, let's say, the least differentiated physical structure in the human body, which would be the fluid. And so, embryologically, also looking at what are the fluids embryologically that we are bathed in, and how are those fluids present in us now? And then that starts to actually inform our connection with the cerebrospinal fluid, et cetera, et cetera.